Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Dr. Ajit Kumar, and in this session, we are going to discuss what is academic writing and how to write a good research paper. Before we get onto the topic as such, let's look at what is knowledge, what is learning, and how does it, help the mankind in its day-to-day life or its, journey in life. For that, I would like to start sharing of my screen where I have a PowerPoint presentation for you. So is the screen visible to everybody? Okay. So, before I get onto the topic as such, as I mentioned, let's look at what is knowledge, what is, learning, and in what way does it help us. I'd like to, in the next slide, share with you this beautiful quote by our ex-president, Dr. APJ Abdul Kalam, where, if you read it, it's a beautiful journey where he connects learning to each and every aspect of life. He says, when learning is purposeful, creativity blossoms. And when creativity blossoms, thinking emanates. And when thinking emanates, knowledge is fully lit. And when knowledge is lit, economy flourishes. The way Dr. Kalam links learning, which is, pursuit of knowledge in a way, to everything of our life, the happiness, the progress, the development in this all four lines is simply telling us what is the importance of knowledge and pursuit of knowledge in our life. If you look at the development of human history, the way human developed in the last many, many centuries, you find that since the time immemorial, the pursuit of knowledge has been the key to human development. Without a highly, sincere, focused, and unrelenting pursuit of knowledge, mankind wouldn't have evolved to a stage where we are in. And we find it in every sphere of life, whether it is social, economical, philosophical, ecological, or you name any sphere of life, the pursuit of knowledge not only drives and controls our present, but it also shapes our future. If we go to the next slide, we find, what is academic writing. Before that, academics or academia is that part of the society which is engaged in this pursuit of knowledge. And being engaged in the pursuit of knowledge, this is one of the most important part of the society, which, gives directions to the society, guides the society, shows light to the society in a period of darkness, and is a torchbearer of development in the society. And as I mentioned, it not only controls and drives our present, but also shapes our future. If you look at, normally, not many times, it is asked, what is academic writing? Is it an art or a science? I always say that academic writing is an art as well as science at the same time. Because, academic writing, you have to follow a certain pattern, a certain discipline. And when you follow a focused, well-knit pattern, like the brush strokes of an artist or a painter in an artwork, and at the same time, when the whole academic writing is based on facts, logical arguments, based on evidence, and you get to conclusions and results which are verifiable, it becomes a science. So in that way, we can say that the academic writing is art as well as science at the same time. I know what is writing. Writing is a medium of expression, and academic writing is also a medium of expression of your knowledge. The way you, transport your knowledge, this provides you the vehicle. Through the academic writing, you convey whatever you have acquired as your knowledge, whatever are your comments on anything, whatever is your line of thinking, whatever are your arguments, So, this is the way academic writing becomes a vehicle to convey knowledge from one person to the other, or maybe from one generation to the other also. And if you really look at it in the history of humankind's evolution, especially in the development of civilization in our country, you find the age old, thousands of years old, our Vedas and Puranas and Upanishads, and for that matter, even the Bhagavad Gita, are such a beautiful, exquisite pieces of academic writing, which can tell us how the knowledge has to be recorded and passed on to the next generation. If you look at in the recent history, the writings of great philosopher and educationist and our second president of the country, Dr. Sarvepalli Radhakrishnan, you see how beautifully he conveys his ideas, expresses himself through his writing, and you get to know in a very simple manner what is his line of thinking, what he is trying to convey. His writings are really a treat to read, and I would suggest if some of you, maybe most of you would have read some of them, but if you have not read them, please read the writings of Dr. Sarvepalli Radhakrishnan. It's really a beautiful journey which it takes you through when he writes about education, when he writes about religious philosophy, when he writes about many things in life. Similarly, if you come to even a recent past, our great, another ex-president, Dr. APJ Abdul Kalam, when he writes, the way he wrote the Igniting the Minds, the way he expresses himself, and you saw his writing, a sample of his writing, I would say, in the first slide when I presented to you. You need to read his writings as well to know as to what is academic writing. The way he, expresses himself not only on scientific issues, but other issues of life as well. It really teaches us, guides us to, graduate to that higher level of academic writing. And it is something, that academic writing needs to be, taken in such a way that, you take it as a journey, of the reader. And when a reader reads your academic writing, your medium of expression, the way it has to be done is such that the reader finds it very easy to read, smooth to read, and his mind is ignited for thinking about the subject in which you are writing. We can also say that academic writing is a treasure house. This is the treasure house in which knowledge is stored from generations to generations. And it is passed on from generations to generations. Generations get guided, get enriched by it, and the society's future is shaped by it. But at the same time, the way academic writing is sometimes treated these days, one has to be very careful. And I would say, in order to make academic writing really a treasure house of such knowledge, which would be useful for generations, its quality, its precision, and relevance to the society has to be safeguarded with full seriousness. We need to respect academic writing with full seriousness. Now let's come to the specifics, like what is academic writing? We can say, academic writing is a formal style of writing, and which is employed normally in the realm of higher education, in the universities and academic journals. And this is the way where either you're writing a research paper, or you're writing a review paper, or you're writing you are expressing your views about some issues. The academic writing always has a certain pattern to follow. And it can be said, it's very formal, unbiased, clear, precise, focused, well-structured, well-sourced, correct, and consistent. You see, there are many ingredients which goes into good academic writing, which are mentioned here in this slide. It has to be totally presented in a formal manner, but at the same time, it has to be totally unbiased. You do not, sort of give a very radical sort of a view. You make a balanced writing. Whatever you're trying to say has to be very clear so that the reader is able to pick up or is able to grasp what you're trying to say. The precision also has to be there. It has to be precise. It doesn't have to be, sort of a very lengthy or unnecessary going round and round or something like that, which you find sometimes in some papers. At the same time, it has to be focused. You need to focus on the topic you're writing. You need to always be on the topic. You don't need to wander away from the topic and get into something else. Otherwise, the writing will lose its impact. Similarly, it has to be, well structured, well sourced, and all that, as I mentioned. Let's try to be a little more specific now. What are the, main features of academic writing? If we take it on a very macro view, there are a few things which I can mention here as it is in the slide for you. The planning and focus of academic writing is very important. It's one of the most important features of academic writing. You have to plan your writing in advance up to the minutest details so that the writing or the paper which you are preparing or the research project which you are writing becomes a very well-lit and a clear, precise paper. And if you do not plan, like sometimes I have seen when some research projects and some papers come for review, then sometimes you find that because it seems the writer has not planned the paper properly, so he keeps jumping from one place to the other. He's discussing one issue now, again, he jumps to the second issue, then he comes back to the first issue. In that way, it becomes a very clumsy paper and somehow conveys to the reader that the writer, number one, has not planned his paper properly. And number two, it seems that the writer is not very clear also about what he's writing about. So this has to be very carefully, kept in mind. And before you start writing, you need to plan your paper very, very carefully. And in detail, as I mentioned, plan it to the minutest details. Try to plan it up to each paragraph which you are going to write so that, you will be on the track. You will not be going here and there. You will not be wavering away. And the focus will be maintained. Similarly, it has to be focused, as I mentioned earlier also. Because when you take up a subject, you have to talk about the subject only. You cannot go on to various subjects at the same time and write a paper. Let's say, if you pick up a topic for research and you're writing a research project, then you need to focus on the research topic, what you are trying to do, why you are trying to do, and how you are trying to do it. This is what academic writing's main sort of strength is, the focus in it. If you do not have the focus, the reader or the reviewer also loses interest in reading your paper or your project, and then the sort of writing doesn't get any value. So you need to plan it in advance and need to be always focused in your writing. Number one. Number two, you also need to structure the writing very well. When you have planned what you are going to write, you need to lay down the structure in very clear terms as to what will come first, what will come second, what will come third, and so on and so forth, so that you ultimately produce a very smooth reading of the paper which you have produced. It has a very smooth logical flow, and present your ideas and your information which you are trying to present about the issue in a very sequential, properly flowing manner. In case of lack of structure, I found many a times with other vice chancellor colleagues of mine also, that this type of structuring, if it is missed or if it is not done properly, the paper starts properly, then starts deviating from the main topic to in between, then again comes back and goes out. And in between, many things come in. And then you lose focus on the main topic on which you're writing or which you're working on. So the structure has to be decided and sort of written down, I would say, on paper very clearly, that what would come first, what would come second, and so on and so forth, as I mentioned. Then the paper becomes a very good paper, has a lot of value, gets quoted everywhere, and your your labor and hard work, which you have put in either the project work or in writing the paper, really bears proper fruit. It gets you proper rewards. Otherwise, it would not. Next, it has to, always demonstrate domain expertise. It should support opinions and claims with evidence. And these evidence are referenced appropriately. Like whatever you're trying to say, you should always you need to bring, always the evidence which you are sort of trying to support your arguments, trying to support your line of thought. Whatever sort of, hypothesis you have made in, let's say, in a research project, then you need to generate evidence either by if you are working in the field of science or technology, in the laboratory, through your experiments, you have to create evidence, you have to generate data, or if you are working in humanities and other fields, through your, either empirical data through surveys, etc. There are many tools for that, as all of you know. So through that, you need to, bring in whatever evidence is available in the academic domain to support your opinion or whatever logical arguments you are building up. And it should prove your expertise that, yes, you have done hard work, you know the subject very well on which you are writing. And then whatever evidence is used, many times we find, people use evidences but do not refer to it properly. The referencing is not done properly. Then it loses the value of the evidence, becomes little, I would say, discounted, or, it doesn't become that valuable. So each evidence has to be referenced appropriately. And you need to see that no evidence gets, is there without any proper reference. Then, the form and style. Of course, as I had mentioned earlier in another slide, that the academic writing is a formal writing. So it has to have a formal way of, using precise terminology. It has to be clear. It has to be concise and balanced. In many times, I have found in papers that the clarity, is missing to a great extent. The writer or the faculty who has written either the research project or the paper starts with something and then doesn't remain on that, but starts going here and there, which shows that he's not very clear about what he's going to work on, or what he has worked on, or what he's writing about. That, makes the paper not of a very high quality and gives the impression to the reader that maybe the paper is not perhaps worth the time for reading it. Same time, you have to be precise, because you are writing in a formal style. You cannot go on writing and writing and writing without conveying your arguments clearly. So be concise, be precise, and convey your arguments very clearly. And as I mentioned earlier also, the writing should be balanced. You have to give credence to other opinions. You have to give proper value to other such work which has been done, what other arguments have been put forward by different people. And so balance your writing in such a way that it shows that whatever your way of thinking is highly balanced. You have gone through the writings of others, you have evaluated them, and you give them the due regards and due respects, so that your writing becomes much more valuable. Excuse me. Recently we have found that there are many new styles of academic writing also being tried, and mainly in the field of literature and other such domains. where people sort of try to, mention mainly about their feelings, their imaginary sort of world, or their sort of, in a way, they do not describe what is there in the society, but they try to go into the field of imaginary world. This type of, sort of writing, although it is called these days innovative writing, but uh, I think, that has to be, or that can be, tried maybe in literature, but maybe in other faculties like humanities or science and technology. Maybe innovative writing even today doesn't have much of an application. About this innovating writing, there's two people who I'd like to quote. Richardson says that quality, content, and knowledge provide an innovative way to present reviews, the social science norms, and discursive practices. Similarly, Ellis and Boschner have also said make their statement like include creative writing strategies that engage the reader in addition to detailing the background of the study, including characters in the discussion, and then changing the authority's perspective. I mean, you can think of being creative, but in case of academic writing, when you are working around facts, you're working based on evidence, your arguments are to be based on evidence. The creativity has to be within the realm of, precision, within the sort of realm of actuality in life, and it cannot become imaginary. So in that way, it has to be, I would say, new innovative writing has a little application towards, other than literature domain. Maybe in literature, it has been tried earlier also. It may be tried even in future, but no, in my opinion, it has to be limited and may not have enough sort of a role to play in other fields of academics. Now, let us try to be a little more specific about what are the protocols of an effective academic writing. The protocols which are there are very well laid out because academic writing has to be a totally formal writing within a laid down pattern. So the first thing which I would say is define the purpose of writing and the audience. If you are clear about the purpose of your writing, and you're also clear about the audience who is going to read it and use it, then your writing becomes much more, I would say, focused, much more targeted, much more precise, and much more useful. Otherwise, if you are not clear about that, then you write in many ways where many people may get something out of it, but the actual targeted audience may not get everything out of it which it should get. So you should be clear about the purpose of your writing and the audience in the beginning itself, and accordingly, you have to decide the structure of your writing. As I mentioned earlier, you need to create the overall structure before you start writing. You create a list of main points and arrange them in such a way that your writing, ultimately, when you write it, as per the structure which you have decided, it becomes a very, flowing, sort of easily readable, smooth flow, easily understandable sort of piece of writing. And the reader feels happy because he's able to understand it easily, feels happy because he's able to get something out of it, and he enjoys reading your writing. Similarly, each paragraph you have to write in a very structured manner. Like when you have decided about a certain paragraph in your structure and you're writing the paragraph, you need to organize your arguments in such a way that the argument in that paragraph also are focused on the topic which you are trying to touch in the paragraph. So in the paragraph is, something which is a subset of a larger set of your whole, writing whole paper. And this subset also has to be properly structured. When your flow of arguments and thoughts, your propositions have to be, in a very sequential, proper manner, so that that structured paragraph also will convey a proper meaning, a proper sort of, I would say, proper line of thought which you're trying to convey, and reader will be able to, at least get what he's trying to get out of your paper. Then the next thing which we have discussed earlier also is evidence to your writing. Unless evidence is given for every argument which you are trying to build up, the paper, in my opinion, I would use a very harsh word. I'll say, without an evidence, the paper will have no value at all. So never miss this point. And whatever argument you're trying to build up, you have to create evidence to support it. And you have to see that evidences are created in such a proper manner, whether it is in the laboratory or whether it is through, primary data creation or whatever. You have to, sort of arrange the evidences in such a way that it clearly brings out support to your hypothesis. And then only, the paper will have a proper value and, it can have an application everywhere in the related fields. Otherwise, if there are no evidences, the paper is just a sort of a figment of imagination, one, I would say. It will be a sort of a chain of thoughts which are not supported. So nobody would like to quote it anywhere. The academic world would not like to look at it. So the evidence is one of the most important thing which should be looked at and which should be kept in mind by you when you are writing a research paper or a research project. Now, similarly, going further in the protocols of effective academic writing, many times you find that when the reader reads the paper, he finds that the clarity is missing. Although many paragraphs have been written, many evidences are also there, but the clarity is missing in the paper. And so the reader is not able to make out what is the writer trying to convey. What hypothesis is he trying to prove? What is the line of thinking which he's trying to advance or is trying to move further? So the clarity has to be there in your writing, what you're trying to say, what you're trying to convey. Then it has to be precise and concise so that, the writing doesn't become a sort of an endless chain of thoughts only and goes on and on. And it has to be formal. And, the active-passive theory of using, the way you should write in an active and passive sentences, that you should always keep in mind. Then, the conveying opinion, like, research ideas and arguments are always subject to criticism that you should keep in mind. You may think that you have done very hard work in your research, you have come to a certain conclusion and you're advancing your argument, you're supporting it with evidence, and so there should not be any criticism. It's not so. The realm of knowledge or realm of research is such that one research gives, birth to another research. One research paper gives ideas to a reader who starts research from where you have left. So there will be sort of criticism of your paper. You should keep it in mind, and your language should always convey in your paper that, yes, there are many other possibilities. There are many possibilities further than what you have done. And you should always guard against suggesting anything which is not true in your studies. Something which is not correct, which is not true, should never be mentioned in your studies, in your paper at all. Otherwise, the paper sort of doesn't carry any weight in the minds of the reader or in the academic world. So, you need to be careful about that. Similarly, the correct tense and voice has to be used in your paper. Many times you find, maybe some over-enthusiastic young faculty writing a research project or a research paper saying, I did this and I will do this and I will do that. We must keep in mind that in academic writing, this word I doesn't have a place. So you should be careful. It has to be proper tense and proper voice has to be used. So that, it doesn't become a sort of I and I. Now, as I have mentioned earlier, developing an argument in your paper is one of the most important part. Like if you have a hypothesis which you are working on, if you have generated some data and then you are putting your argument to support your hypothesis on the basis of data, then developing an argument also is an art. A better way of establishing your argument could be like, there's just few examples I'm giving you here. Like begin each paragraph with an unattributed assertion, followed by evidence, facts, and arguments from your sources. Then, it becomes much more authentic. It sounds more authentic, or it, feels much more authentic in reading. Similarly, clearly describe the links between sources to your reader. Because, if you do not describe the links to your links between sources, then the reader doesn't get an idea how you have derived or how you have reached a certain, argument, and how you are quoting a certain source in what manner. So similarly, clearly state the connections between those sources and your key claim to your, hypothesis. Then make use of the words to express your strong agreement, disagreement, vary agreement with sources. Wherever you have disagreement with the sources, you're quoting them, but you have disagreements, you need to express it very clearly, but at the same time, of course, in a very civilized and dignified manner. That disagreement may be strong, the agreement may be strong, but it has to be with a proper language to be used for that. At the end of each paragraph, you provide something so that, which says that now this is what it is. And so this brings us to this destination. Now what needs to be done further? So each paragraph will lead you to the next paragraph. And then it will be a linking to between paragraphs in your argument building up. So that, it doesn't feel a disconnected paragraph or disconnected argument in the paper at one place or the other places. Because, sometimes we have seen that many times arguments are advanced which are not connected to each other. Then you feel lost to understand as to why this argument is here and what is trying to be said. What is the reader trying to say? So that has to be very clearly safeguarded against, and so that the paper becomes of some value, of some quality, of high standard. Now, let us see as to what are the steps you need to follow for effective academic writing. The first thing which I would say in effective academic writing is the introductory paragraph. Now, the introduction is like the head of the body, like the brain of the paper, which ultimately will give an idea to the reader as to what is in the paper. So the introduction has to be, a strong introduction, informative, and it should motivate the reader to write a new thing based on whatever you have written, to take it further, or to read more and more, and to get into new areas of research or new areas of knowledge with the help of your paper. So the introduction always has to be quite strong. Introduction has to be quite effective, and it should be something like a sort of a motivation to the reader or to the reviewer to read the paper carefully and with full diligence, so that your paper gets proper value. Then comes the body. The body, as we have seen, when you make the structure, the body has to be also properly structured. In the body, the position of the paragraphs has to be properly determined, has to be properly decided, depending upon, what is to be placed at what place and what meaning will it carry. So the positioning of each paragraph in the body has to be decided in the structure in advance very carefully, so that, your writing conveys what you are trying to convey. Otherwise, misplacement of paragraphs, we have found sometimes that paragraph wrongly misplaced totally reverses the argument. That, is something disastrous sometimes. So be very careful in planning the body and the structure of the body, the layout of the paragraphs also in your paper, so that, your paper becomes sort of some value in conveying your arguments, which are supported by evidence, which are, which are a result of your hard work. It should convey it properly. And then comes the conclusion. Of course, the conclusion is one of the most important things, because it ultimately gives in very precise terms what you have done and what you have achieved, or what you are trying to say in your paper, and what ultimately you have achieved by putting out your arguments, putting out your evidences. What ultimately have you achieved in that? Where have you reached? So, the powerful ending of the paper has to be very important. And the powerful ending, is beautifully said, that powerful ending is round, where it takes you back to the beginning of the paper and then summarizes the key points of the whole paper itself. So the conclusion, is sort of a summary of the whole paper, where all your thoughts, all your hypotheses, all your arguments are summarized in a precise manner, so that the conclusion gives a bird's eye view in precision that what you have written in the paper and what ultimately it is resulting in. It is also an opportunity to see how well your writing or your essay captures the point of the thesis. So the conclusion part has to be, very carefully decided in a way where, you need to convey whatever you have conveyed in a very, sum it up in a precise manner. Now, let us talk about writing a good research paper. What are the steps of writing a good research paper? The first thing is you should decide about the abstract. And as you know, all of you know that abstract is a brief overview of a research article or a review or a conference or your research topic. So you have to, in brief, indicate as to what are you trying to work on, what is the idea you are working on, what is the hypothesis you are going to test, and what you are trying to reach at. So that, the reader knows that, yes, this paper has something in it, and he gets motivated to read your research paper. Then there comes the introduction part. As we have discussed earlier, the introduction has to be powerful, and it really gets into the specific issues of your paper in a very precise manner, so that it gives also an idea as to, the reader knows that in the paper, he or she will find these things to read. Then the area of study. In the research paper, your area of study has to be decided by you very carefully. And it is an important part of research because, narrowing down an area of study to a very narrow sort of a domain sometimes makes the study not only very difficult, but very not very useful. At the same time, keeping area of study very, very wide also sometimes makes the study lose its total impact. So the area of study has to be carefully balanced, carefully planned out, and you need to sort of plan it focused around your subject which you have chosen for researching or your writing. Then you need to define your objectives in very clear terms. And then comes the methodology and databases you are used. There are various methods which are used in research these days. New methods are also coming up. New softwares are coming up. So you need to mention your methodology and the databases you are using, whether you're using a primary data or a secondary data or whatever, so that, the reader understands, or the reviewer or the evaluator understands that, yes, this is the tool you have used in doing your work. And on the basis of that, he will evaluate as to how well you have used the tool and how well you have, tested your hypothesis. Next, is elaborating the research paper. I mean, when you have described about the methodology and all, then you naturally need to write about your subject of research in detail. But at the same time, as I mentioned earlier, the structure has to be decided properly. In elaboration also, you need to have a structured paragraphs in the elaboration so that it makes easy reading. Many times you find very good research papers getting, sort of not getting the attention it deserves because the structuring has not been done properly. People, reviewer also, evaluators find it difficult to evaluate them because the structuring is very clumsy. So you need to, in elaborating your research topic with what you have done, you need to structure it in a very flowing, smooth flow manner so that people can read it. And there are various, softwares also these days which you can use for, doing this properly. Then there comes the recommendation and suggestions. In this part, you need to ultimately, when you have sort of almost completed your journey of research, you have done hard work, then you need to finally come to a point where you recommend what needs to be done further, or what is your suggestion for if there is any further work required on the same topic, what work further can be done. So this also is a very important part, because one good paper which contains good recommendations and suggestions, as I had mentioned earlier, leads to another research which which serves the humanity, which serves the society well, and that's how knowledge evolves and develops. So one after research gives birth to another research, and that's how knowledge travels. So make your recommendations and suggestions very carefully, and you need to keep in mind that your research will give rise to many more researches in future on the topic. And finally, the conclusion. As we have discussed earlier, the conclusion has to be little powerful, has to be a summary of whatever you have written in the paper since the beginning to the end. And it also leaves a sort of a hint or a suggestion for future work. So the conclusion also has to be like the introduction. The conclusion also has to be really powerful, so that people get as Dr. Kalam said, the conclusion should ignite the mind of other researchers, other faculty, other people to take up research in the area further, and that area further develops. Now, the core aspects of academic writing, which is formal writing, as we have seen, can be like this. One is characteristics that are universal. Like the accuracy, is one of the important parts, important ingredient of a good research paper. The accuracy in the paper about whatever you're saying, duly supported by evidence, give credence to the paper, gives value to the paper, and gives the academic world the value which it has today. Because in the academic world, you always go for accuracy, you support your arguments with evidence, and such papers only, get quoted, get, looked at every time. And papers which do not do that, do not bother for accuracy, normally are not looked at a second time at all. So keep this in mind very carefully when you're writing a research paper or a research project. Then the verbs usage also has to be in a very professional manner, in a very correct manner. And this is one part of academic writing which I find many times missing. So I'd suggest to the younger faculty to sort of, get into, understanding this whole verbs usage concept very clearly as to what can be done and what cannot be done. Next, definitions. Definitions in your academic writing are very important because, it builds the boundaries in which your writing has to be there. You define something and go according to that in your paper. So definitions are very important. Make the definitions as specific as you can, make it as clear as you can, and make it as concise as you can. Plus, also keep in mind that the definition would be read by large audience. So you need to also see that, what audience is going to read it, and accordingly put your definitions properly. Because if one wrong definition, will totally turn your paper upside down. So please don't do that. Similarly, excuse me, supporting evidence. As we have I have been repeating every time, supporting evidence is one of the, touchstone of a good academic writing. Unless your paper stands the test of good supporting evidence being there, your paper will not have any value at all. So be very, very, careful in that. See that your paper has good quality supporting evidence. Evidence is genuine and it is properly referenced, so that, the reader or the evaluator gets the idea very easily that, yes, you have done a genuine, true hard work. Then the paragraphs, paragraphs will have to be properly placed. The flow of your arguments in the paragraph has to be smooth and duly supported by evidence at the same time, at the same place, so that, the argument, once you give an argument and give an evidence immediately after it, then the argument sinks into the mind of the reader that, yes, this is a correct argument. So you need to be careful about that as well. Then normally, people ask as to what are the required skills for good academic writing, what one should have, what qualities one should have. I would say, of course, academic writing is a serious business, and I have, as I have been mentioning every time, that it has to be taken up seriously and treated seriously. But at the same time, don't make it too complicated for yourself. Don't think it is a rocket science. It is something which is very easy, provided you have the perseverance, you have the capacity to hard work and learn. You must, have few things for a good academic writing. Like, you should have the command on the language in which you are writing. As you see in the academic world, most of the papers are written in English almost all over the world. So you need to have a good proficiency in English language. And, learning English language or improving English language is not a rocket science at all. Many times you find that people who have done good work in research, they somehow are not able to convey what they have done with so much of hard work so sincerely, because some sort of, lack in command over the language. So in spite of the hard work, the language, makes your paper of a very average quality or below average quality. So you need to improve your English language for academic writing. And this can be easily done by reading, by writing more and more, by reading more and more good papers, by looking at what, good writers in the academic world have written, how they have written, what is done, what is not done, what is correct, what is wrong. All those things, if you keep in mind, your language proficiency will improve and you can write a good paper. Similarly, preparatory work, as I mentioned earlier, the planning of the paper, the structuring of the paper, gathering of facts, gathering of information, all this, is a very, very important part of good academic writing. You cannot produce a good paper unless, you, number one, you plan it properly. Number two, you structure it properly. Number three, you gather enough information, enough evidence about your arguments. If you have these three things mainly, then, you can produce a good paper. And finally, you have to develop the capacity to build up arguments which are based on evidence. Like when you're writing paper, as I have been mentioning repeatedly here, I will repeat again for your benefit, that, arguments without an evidence are of no value, are of zero value totally. So you should learn how to build up your argument about anything which you're saying, and then support it with evidence immediately. So that, people know that, yes, you have given an argument, you have enough evidence supporting it. So what your paper says is a genuine work which you have done, and it has to be taken seriously and given a high value. Similarly, in the latest scenario is that in most of the cases, in research papers especially, I find that whether it is corporate which is funding a research project, whether it is the government which is funding a research project, or maybe international funding organizations, most of them these days are preferring to fund such research projects which are related to the day-to-day problems of life. A research project which can solve to some small or big problem, whatever, some problem of life of mankind in today's life, is always given a preference in funding, and is always said to be, appropriate and relevant, because most of the, evaluation committees and, places where the funding agencies also are represented, I find them commenting that if the research project has no relevance of life with life today, is not able to solve a problem of life today, then what is the use of, sort of funding it with so much of money and wasting so much of time, energy of the researcher as well as the organization? So, it has to be related to day-to-day life. It has to be relevant for the society, and society must get something out of it. Society's problems should be solved. So the research project should always be linked to that. And ultimately, I'd say that academic writing is something which is very, very developed, sort of an art, and a very, very evolved science at the same time, as I mentioned in the beginning. So it should not only convey your thoughts and knowledge, rather it should make others think more deeply and further on the subject. Like I mentioned earlier, whatever you're writing, the reader should, get ideas as to what he can do further on the same subject. That, builds up the chain of knowledge in the society or in the academic world or in the research world. And that's how humanity develops. So, you should be, as Dr. Kalam said, which I have mentioned earlier, I'll repeat, your research paper, your research project should be able to ignite the mind of the reader, of the others, so that they take up the next level of work and take the level of knowledge of the society to the next, further higher level. Ultimately, your research or your paper should act as a catalyst for the society and for the development of mankind, for the evolution of mankind. Because a paper which doesn't have this is of no value for the society, for the mankind at all. Similarly, as I have mentioned in between, that these days, in the name of writing paper, a lot of papers are written, pardon my using very strong words, which are not worth the paper on which they are written. So, ultimately, you may have the numbers that I have written 5 papers or 10 papers in a year, but those 10 papers taken together will not have the value worth the paper on which they are written if it is not done properly. So, what is happening? On the one hand, you have put in a lot of effort, a lot of time, a lot of resources, all that goes to waste. The society doesn't get anything out of it. The academia, the academic world doesn't gain anything out of it. So what is the use of writing such papers? So somehow I feel really little concerned that, a large number of, especially the younger faculty is indulging into these things. So I'd suggest to the younger faculty, and please don't take it otherwise, it's for your good, that write papers which are good in quality, which are truthful, which are ethical, and which serve the humanity, which does something good for the society. And for, keeping the academic world at a high pedestal, which it has achieved through so much of hard work of your senior people, senior researchers, senior faculty, senior professors, senior thinkers, senior philosophers, we need to safeguard against, this deterioration in the field of academic writing. And I would say that every stakeholder of the academia, be it students, teachers, or the peer group, they need to seriously understand the value and potential of academic writing and take serious effort, take serious view to uphold its sanctity, integrity, and purity. Because academic writing is a very serious business and should be treated with full respect it deserves. Thank you very much.